I thought moving into this neighborhood would be a dream. A quiet lake, plenty of space, and no one to bother me. I was wrong. I didn't realize just how much power the HOA thought they had. I didn't know that saying no to them was practically a crime. And I definitely didn't expect them to show up on my property, tearing down my fence like they owned the place, all because I refused to bend to their authority. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. The morning the letter arrived, the world outside my window was the same as it had always been. The lake shimmered in the early light, untouched and still, the way it had been since the first day I laid eyes on it. Birds chirped in the distance, the soft rustle of trees carried through the breeze, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then I opened the envelope. At first, I assumed it was just another HOA notice, one of those routine complaints about lawn height or mailbox color. But as my eyes landed on the bold letters printed across the page, a chill ran down my spine. Violation of property rights. Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in fines and potential legal action. I read it again, slower this time, trying to make sense of what they were claiming. The HOA, Karen's HOA, was saying my lake wasn't private at all. They were calling it a public resource, open for anyone in the neighborhood to use. Anyone. I gripped the paper so hard it crumpled in my hands. Public? They wanted to turn my lake into some free-for-all community spot where anyone could fish, swim, and do whatever the hell they wanted on my property. And I knew exactly whose idea this was. Karen had been running the HOA like a dictator for the past 5 years. She wasn't just a rule enforcer, she was a bully, a woman who lived for power, for control. She was the kind of person who cared more about the appearance of the neighborhood than the people living in it. She had started small, complaints about unauthorized garden decorations, warnings about the non-standard color of my house, threats over the improper storage of my boat. Petty, annoying things, but this was war. The sound of footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts. My wife, Claire, stepped into the room, frowning as she saw me gripping the letter like it had personally offended me. "What is it?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. I didn't answer. I just handed her the letter and waited. She read through it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to pure anger. "Are they serious?" she whispered. "The HOA thinks they can just take the lake?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Not just take it, they want to open it to the entire neighborhood." Claire shook her head, her grip on the letter tightening. "But we have the deed. The lake is on our land. They can't do this." "Karen thinks she can do whatever she wants," I muttered. I could already picture her smug expression, her clipboard clutched tightly in her perfectly manicured hands as she went on about community benefits and equal access. Equal access? To my property? Over my dead body? Claire took a deep breath. "So what do we do?" I walked to the window and looked out at the lake, the water perfectly still, reflecting the trees like a mirror. It was ours. It had always been ours, and I wasn't about to let Karen or anyone else take it away. "We fight," I said. "They want a battle? They've got one." I took action. By noon, I was in the hardware store, loading up my truck with exactly what I needed: wood, nails, concrete, steel posts. If Karen wanted to fight over this lake, I was going to make damn sure she saw just how serious I was. By the time I got back home, the sun was already lowering in the sky. I wasted no time, heading straight for the lake and marking the perimeter. Claire stood at the back porch watching, hands on her hips. "You're really doing this?" she asked. I didn't even look up. "Damn right I am. I wasn't just building a fence, I was building a statement, one that said, 'Stay out.'" As I started hammering in the first post, I could already feel the weight of watching eyes from the houses nearby. The neighborhood was small, but gossip spread fast. This lake wasn't just a feature of my property, it was the heart of it. It was the reason I had bought this land in the first place, drawn to the quiet ripples that reflected the sky, the scent of pine carried by the wind, the way the world seemed to slow down the moment I stepped onto the dock. It was where I spent early mornings fishing, where my wife and I had shared some of our best conversations, where the stress of life melted away with each lap of water against the shore. This wasn't just some body of water. It was my peace, my refuge. And now the HOA wanted to rip that away. Some watched in curiosity. Others whispered in hushed voices, likely already texting in their little group chats. And I knew, somewhere, Karen was hearing about this. Good. Let her know. By the time the sun set, the first section of the fence was up. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to send a message. That night, as I sat on the porch with Claire, watching the last of the light fade over the lake, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I didn't need to guess. I picked up, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Nathan." Karen. Her voice was smooth, polite, fake. "I heard about the little project you've started. I think we need to talk." I clenched my jaw, already knowing what was coming. "We've got nothing to talk about, Karen," I said flatly. "Oh, but we do," she insisted. "You see, your fence is in direct violation of HOA regulations. And well, if it's not removed, you're going to be facing some serious consequences." I let out a short laugh. "You mean more empty threats?" "Not empty, Nathan. Legal." My grip on the phone tightened. "You don't own my lake, Karen." There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice lower now, edged with amusement. "Let's see what the court has to say about that." The line went dead. I set the phone down, my pulse steady, my decision made. The next morning I woke up to pounding on my front door. Not just knocking, angry, impatient pounding. I pulled the door open, and there she was. Karen, clipboard in hand, standing on my porch like she owned the damn place. She was dressed in one of her usual HOA power suits, her eyes sharp and calculating. Behind her, two other board members stood, arms crossed, nodding along like mindless followers. "Nathan," Karen said, plastering on a fake smile, "we need to have a civil discussion." "Funny, because last night you sounded more like a threat than a discussion." Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, you misunderstand. I'm simply here to inform you that your fence is already being challenged by the HOA board. You can save yourself the trouble and take it down now, before legal action is necessary." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Not happening." She let out a long, dramatic sigh. "Nathan, the lake isn't just for you. People in this neighborhood have used it for years. We're talking about community access." I cut her off with a laugh. "Community access? You mean people trespassing on my property?" Her smile thinned. "The lake is a resource, and keeping it to yourself is selfish. This neighborhood thrives on fairness. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have to escalate this matter legally." I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "You're making a mistake, Karen." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't back down. "No, Nathan, you are." Over the next few days, things got worse. Neighbors started whispering louder, siding with Karen. Some even had the nerve to tell me I was being unreasonable. One afternoon, while I was finishing another section of the fence, I heard something. Wood snapping. I turned the corner and stopped cold. Karen was standing by the lake, with two men, and they were tearing down my fence. I saw red. I stormed over, fists clenched. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen turned, smirking. "Fixing your mistake." One of the men tossed a piece of my fence onto the ground like trash. They were destroying what was mine. I stepped closer, my voice deadly calm. "If you don't leave right now, you'll regret it." Karen just smiled. "This is only the beginning, Nathan." I looked at the wreckage of my fence, and I made a decision. By the time the sun rose, I was already on the phone. "Maya, I need you." Maya Reynolds wasn't just a lawyer. She was a weapon, the kind of attorney who made people like Karen wish they'd never been born. I gave her a quick rundown of everything. The letters, the threats, the destruction of my fence. I could almost hear the smirk in her voice when she responded, "Oh, this is going to be fun. Send me every document you have. We're about to make their lives hell." I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make sure Karen regretted ever stepping foot near my lake. By noon, the first cease and desist letter was on its way to the HOA. Karen wanted to play legal games? Fine. I was about to drown her in paperwork. Within hours, Maya had filed a formal complaint against the HOA, citing trespassing, destruction of property, and harassment. She even threw in a demand for damages, and it wasn't small. But the best part? The police report. I called the cops as soon as I spotted Karen and her little demolition team ripping down my fence like they had every right to. By the time the officers showed up, she was already gone, but the damage was impossible to miss. When the squad car pulled up, its flashing blue and red lights cutting through the early evening dusk, I felt the first rush of satisfaction. Finally, some real consequences. The officer who stepped out was Sergeant Daniels, a stocky, no-nonsense guy who had probably seen it all. He adjusted his duty belt as he approached, giving the wreckage of my fence a once-over before turning his sharp eyes to me. "You the one who called this in?" he asked. I nodded, arms crossed, my pulse still running hot. "Yeah, you're looking at what's left of my fence." Daniels let out a low whistle, walking along the shattered wood, nudging one of the posts with his boot. "Damn shame," he muttered. He pulled out a small notepad and flipped it open. "Tell me exactly what happened." I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. "Karen Caldwell, she's the HOA president, came onto my property with 2 guys and tore down my fence. No warning, no permission, just ripped it apart." Daniel's pen scratched against the paper as he jotted down notes. "You got security cameras?" I shook my head. "No, but I've got witnesses." He nodded. "And do you have property records showing this fence was legally built?" I smirked. "Oh, yeah. And a lawyer who's already filing a civil suit." That got his attention. Daniels glanced up from his notepad, eyes narrowing slightly. "So you're serious about pressing charges?" I didn't hesitate. "Damn right I am." Daniels clicked his pen closed and tucked the notepad into his vest pocket. "Good, because from what I'm seeing here, this isn't just some neighborly dispute. This is criminal mischief and trespassing. Might even fall under destruction of property, depending on the damage estimate." I crossed my arms tighter. "And what does that mean for Karen?" Daniels sighed, shifting his weight. "Well, for starters, I'll be making a visit to her house tonight. She's going to have some explaining to do." He paused, then gave me a knowing look. "And if she gives me attitude, we'll see how she likes a court summons." I clenched my jaw. "Good." The officer walked back toward his car, but stopped just before opening the door. "One more thing," he said, turning back to me. "You should think about getting security cameras. People like her, they don't like losing, and when they do, they get desperate." His words sent a cold spike through me, because deep down I knew he was right. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A knock on my door. When I opened it, James Parker was standing there. James had lived in this neighborhood longer than anyone. He wasn't the kind of guy to get involved in drama, but that morning he looked pissed. "I heard what Karen did," he said, crossing his arms. "That's not right." I raised an eyebrow. "You on my side now?" James sighed. "Look, I didn't like the fence either, but I sure as hell don't like the HOA thinking they can do whatever they want. They had no right to tear it down." I leaned against the door frame. "So what are you saying?" James glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I'm saying you're not the only one sick of Karen's power trip. You're just the first one to stand up to her, and people are watching." He paused. "And some of us are ready to back you up." That was all I needed to hear. Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought she could bully me. Instead, she turned the whole damn neighborhood against her. The next morning, I was outside checking the damage when I saw her. She came storming across the street, heels clicking against the pavement like gunfire, her face twisted in fury. I barely had time to put my coffee down before she was in my face, jabbing a manicured finger toward my chest. "You called the police on me?" she hissed. I leaned against the porch railing, taking my time before answering. "That's usually what you do when someone commits a crime, Karen." Her eyes flashed. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," I smirked. "Oh, you don't like people not following your rules? Welcome to my world." Her nostrils flared, and I knew she was barely holding it together. She wasn't just pissed, she was unraveling. "I had a visit from the police last night," she snapped. "In front of my family. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I imagine it's about as humiliating as having your fence torn down by some wannabe dictator who thinks she owns the neighborhood." Her lips curled in rage. "You are making a huge mistake, Nathan. Do you think this is over just because you got a cop involved? I have connections. I know people. You're going to regret this." I let out a short laugh. Karen, do you even hear yourself? You're standing on my property after getting a warning from the police threatening me? That's bold, even for you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Daniels must have really let her have it last night. I didn't have to imagine how Karen's night went. I got the full rundown from James Parker later that afternoon. Apparently, Sergeant Daniels had shown up just after dinner. Karen had been sitting in her pristine, perfectly decorated living room when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door and saw the cop standing there, her whole body went rigid. "Mrs. Caldwell," Daniels had said, his voice firm, "we need to have a chat." Karen had barely opened her mouth before her husband, Greg, had shuffled into the doorway behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere but there. "Is there a problem, officer?" Greg had asked, his voice wary. Daniels didn't mince words. He pulled out his notepad and got straight to business. "I have a report that you and two unidentified individuals trespassed onto private property and destroyed a legally built structure. You want to explain that?" Karen had immediately launched into one of her classic HOA speeches. "It's not his lake, it's a community resource. He was blocking access to something that belongs to all of us. He was the one violating HOA rules." But Daniels wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Caldwell," he had interrupted, "I've seen the property records. That lake is 100% private, and so is the land around it. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over it." Karen had stiffened. "This is a misunderstanding," she had tried to insist, her voice losing confidence. Daniels had flipped through his notes. "A misunderstanding? Because from where I'm standing, you trespassed, vandalized private property, and instigated a neighborhood dispute that could have been handled legally. You can try to explain this in court, but I don't think a judge is going to be very sympathetic to someone who destroys other people's property just because they don't like the rules." Karen had gone pale. Greg had sighed deeply, rubbing his temples like he was exhausted by his wife's antics. Then came the final blow. "Nathan has already filed a civil suit against you and the HOA," Daniels had added. "And let me be clear, if this escalates any further, criminal charges aren't off the table." Boom! Karen had been fuming, shaking with rage, but for once in her life, she had nothing to say. By the end of the week, Karen was desperate. The HOA sent another letter, this time from their lawyer. "Immediate compliance required. Cease all restrictive barriers and restore public access to the lake. Failure to do so will result in legal action." I almost laughed. They were bluffing, and I called it. My response? A formal letter from Maya, countering every single one of their claims. The lake was private property. The deed proved it. The HOA had no right to enforce public access. Destroying my fence was a crime, and we were prepared to go to court over it. And the best part? We weren't just fighting back. We were suing them. Maya filed a civil lawsuit against Karen and the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and harassment. Now, Karen wasn't just facing pushback. She was facing real consequences. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high. Karen was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her lawyers. She looked confident, but I saw the tightness in her jaw. She was nervous. Good. The judge wasted no time. "The issue at hand is whether the HOA has the right to claim public access to a privately owned lake." Karen's lawyer went first, spewing a bunch of nonsense about community rights and neighborhood traditions. Then it was Maya's turn, and she destroyed them. "We had the deed. The lake was private. Period. The HOA had no legal precedent. They were making up rules as they went. Trespassing and property destruction were crimes. We had police reports, witness statements, and photos to prove it. When Maya finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. Then he looked straight at Karen. "Mrs. Caldwell, the HOA has no legal claim over this property. The lake belongs to Mr. Mercer. Your actions, specifically the destruction of his fence, are not only unlawful but deeply concerning. This case is ruled in favor of the defendant." Boom! Karen's face turned red. The HOA had lost. And then the judge added something else. "Furthermore, the defendant's countersuit for damages is valid. The HOA will be required to cover the cost of the destroyed property." Karen's mouth dropped open. Not only did she lose, she had to pay. By the time I got back home, word had already spread. Karen's grip on the neighborhood had shattered. The HOA had been publicly humiliated, their authority crushed. Neighbors who had once whispered behind my back now nodded in approval as I walked by. A few even stopped me just to say, "Glad you stood up to them." And Karen? She resigned from the HOA 2 weeks later. She couldn't handle the embarrassment. But the best part? The lake was mine, and it always would be. As I sat by the water that evening, watching the last light of the day reflect across the rippling surface, Claire joined me. She leaned against me, sighing contently. "You did it," I smirked. "Damn right I did." She laughed, shaking her head. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." I wrapped an arm around her and looked out over the lake, our lake. Karen was gone. The HOA had backed off, and I had won. But this wasn't just about a lake. It was about standing your ground. Because if you let people like Karen take one thing, they'll come for another. And the moment you give in, you've already lost. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.